Well, good morning. How are we today? Good. As you probably know, today is Palm Sunday. And that means the approach of one of the most sacred days of the year, Dingus Day. The day after Easter, when everyone gets to be Polish. And I would like to know, I'm a little bit afraid to ask, is anybody Polish here? Okay. And Teresa, would you be greatly offended if I told the greatest Polish joke in the world?
No, I might hit you.
Okay. All right. All right. It's just I don't do race jokes. But when I came across the greatest Polish joke in the world, I was like, you know what? I have got to tell this someday. And there are so few occasions when I would feel safe doing that. So a guy walks into a bar and says, "Bartender, do you want to hear the greatest Polish joke in the world?" The bartender said, "Before you tell this joke, perhaps you should know I am Polish." And the big guy sitting to your left, also Polish. And you see the bouncer by the door, also Polish. So now you tell me, do you want to tell the greatest Polish joke in the world? The guy said, "No, I don't want to have to explain the punchline 3 times. So, yeah, I know. I just really like that one. Okay, all right. No, I know. I heard a lot. I heard a lot of Polish jokes growing up, and I just find them so boring because they all go like in the same direction. But that one, I don't know. That one, like, I actually do feel like that's the best one. And it's the only one that I really like. That's not true. There is another one. Now that like nobody's hit me, should we do just one more? Just one more? Okay. You've probably heard this one before. So, I know, yeah. All right. So, Dingus Day was coming to an end. It was 4:30 in the morning. The accordion player was driving home. He was falling asleep at the wheel, and he realized he was not going to make it home all the way safely. So he pulled over at a gas station, went inside, walked up to the coffee machine, and as he was pouring a cup of coffee, he realized that he had left his accordion uncovered in the back seat of the car where anyone could see it, and he dropped the cup of coffee, ran out to the car, but it was too late. Someone had already smashed the window and thrown in 2 more accordions. All right. But someday I really do want, I mean, as an amateur, you know, as someone who enjoys playing the piano, someday I really would love to spend like 20 minutes with an accordion just to find out, like, could I actually play it? Welcome to this place, which we make holy by our presence. These doors are open to all. Bring your brokenness and bring your power. Bring your fatigue, your early morning aches, and your energy. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, where the human is celebrated, where compassion is strength. Welcome to this place. Together we make it a holy place. Please join in, if you are able, for our, wait a minute, for the chalice lighting. The words of the chalice lighting are printed here in your leaflet. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, help and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. Yes, that did just happen. That was not an illusion. That's okay. I walked up to the altar and it burst into flames. I know, and I know, and it's a Unitarian Universalist altar, so I don't even know. So I guess the only thing I can think of is that maybe I've had Jesus on my mind, and Unitarianism, Unitario, or whatever it is angry at me. Okay. And our first hymn will be number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Our responsive reading today will be number 652. Number 652. I'm going to need these because my arm is just not long enough to get this to a place where I can read it. But the great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own, not to make them see with our eyes, but to look inquiringly and steadily with their own. Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth. Not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward springs. Not to bind them by ineradicable prejudices to our particular sect or peculiar notions, but to prepare them for impartial, conscientious judging of whatever subject may be offered to their decision. Not to burden the memory, but to quicken and strengthen the power of thought. Not to impose religion upon them in the form of arbitrary rules, but to awaken conscience, moral discernment. In a word, the great end is to awaken the soul, to excite and cherish spiritual life. The center of our service is when we share our joys and concerns. And I feel like this is as close as we get to a sacrament or a communion. And I really appreciate that. We may think of sharing, sharing one of our problems. We may think of that as like taking up someone else's time or burdening someone else with our troubles. But really that is a form of sharing. And what we are doing is we are inviting that person to feel with us. So please take a moment and think about if there is something that you would like to share today. Jesus famously said, "There is nothing from outside a man that entering into him can defile him. But the things that come out of him, those are the things that defile him." This is generally interpreted to mean that Jesus has abolished the Torah commandments about the kosher diet. That is debatable, since never in any gospel are we told that Jesus ever ate something unclean, like a ham sandwich or a bat. And that's the kind of thing that they would have mentioned, since it was a major controversy in early Christianity. I personally suspect he's talking about speech, what we hear and what we say. But nobody knows for certain. There's something we tend to forget about Jesus, that he never said, "This is what it is, end of debate, shut up." That's the church talking. Jesus didn't talk like that. When someone asked him a question, he would say, "Well, it's kind of like this. Here's a little riddle story. Now think about it for yourself." And this cryptic quote about being contaminated by what comes out is a good example of that. It really gets us thinking about what is a human? Body, skin, organs, blood, breath, spirit. It's not what enters a person, but what leaves that makes one unclean. If Jesus only meant it in the purest spiritual sense, do things enter and leave the soul? Does the spirit eat and poop? The more I try to get one concrete meaning out of this parable, the more it wisps away. As I once heard a preacher say, Jesus, people are always trying to pin him down, and he keeps rising up again. Jesus was fond of eating and drinking. In the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, he says, John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a devil. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a man gluttonous and a wine bibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children. Publicans here means tax collectors. I don't think Jesus would actually consort with Republicans. And they definitely would not put up with him. Remember, Jesus had no birth certificate, no passport, no official ID of any kind. So I assume they would have just deported him. Apparently, the most common reaction when someone heard that Jesus was the Messiah was something like this. Wait a minute, you mean Jesus of Nazareth? That Jesus? I heard he was a glutton and a drunk who hung out with thugs and prostitutes. So in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, Jesus answers this charge by Actually, it's a little bit garbled what he says. Something about how he and John are both progeny of some feminine entity called wisdom, whose reputation is spotless. But what he doesn't do is deny the thing about partying too much with the riffraff and the rabble. The Gospels are full of stories of Jesus going to parties. And as a local celebrity, he was sought out as a dinner guest wherever he went. It's a good thing, too, since he and his followers had all quit their day jobs. One of his most celebrated miracles is turning water into wine for a wedding. Not just a communion sip, but we read 6 water pots containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. A firkin here is 10 gallons. So we're talking about either 120 or 180 gallons of wine. Not cheap wine either. The feast master declares this the best wine of all. Thus it became known as a firkin miracle. I don't know. I don't know. I know, it seemed like it would be worse to not say it. All right. Jesus' reputation as a, quote, wine bibber traveled far and wide after he died. Early Christianity was known for its fervent and zealous imbibing of spirits. The traveling preacher Saul, better known by his nickname Paulus, which meant little guy, quoted Jesus only once. In all of the writings of Paul, he quotes Jesus one time. He reports the Last Supper not as an invitation to faith, but he reports it as in a castigation of the congregation at Corinth. Paul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians, when you get together, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper, for in eating, everyone has already eaten beforehand his own supper, and one is hungry and another one shows up drunk. What? Don't you have your own houses to drink in? For I have received, Paul writes, of the Lord that which I deliver unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, take, eat, this is my body, etc., etc. And then the wine, this is my blood, etc., etc. But Paul adds, but he that eats or drinks unworthily eats and drinks damnation unto himself. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. First of all, the only saying of Jesus that Paul has ever heard is on the topic of eating and drinking. The Gospel of Mark will copy this from Paul. Then the Gospels of Matthew and Luke will copy it from Mark. That's how we get the Last Supper story in these 3 Gospels. The Gospel of John, believe it or not, does not contain the Last Supper at all. Or at least it doesn't contain this report of cannibalism. Just a second. Jesus instead, in John's Gospel, washes the disciples' feet and then dips one bread in wine, saying, he it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot. After the sop, Satan entered into him. Where did this little dash of devil pepper come from? Was it in the wine, on the bread? Was it under Jesus' fingernail, in his sweat? Maybe Jesus should have had plastic gloves and a hairnet if he was going to be feeding people like this. Anyway, we'll never get anywhere looking for Jesus in the Gospel of John or in the letters of Paul. According to Paul, just a moment. See, this is why it's really a problem for me to have my laptop in front of me, because all of the words on this laptop screen are fluid, like they're not solid, they're fluid. And then I just look at it as this fluid thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, this can change. But I shouldn't be changing it right in front of you. Actually, what's happening is that the Holy Ghost is inspiring me with things that I think are so interesting that are not on this page. And then I'm like, I will never remember this. And so then I have to type it in. Anyway, I apologize. According to Paul, who had never met Jesus, and never once in any of his letters mentions any ghostly encounter on the road to Damascus, the Christ wished to be celebrated by eating and drinking. More than this, he wanted to enter the bodies of believers through ingestion. But Paul warns that digesting Jesus unworthily will cause illness, narcolepsy, and or death. Clearly a precursor to modern medicine advertisements in which the auctioneer sputters. Side effects may include drowsiness, diarrhea, dropsy, depilation, defenestration, etc. John's gospel further cautions us that even if Jesus himself puts wine-soaked bread in your hand, it may contain trace elements of Satan, a secret protein-binding agent of chaos called Lucifer. The digestion or indigestion of Jesus is open to all manner of interpretation. As a child, I wondered if a weekly communion wafer might make up for not brushing my teeth. And now several of them have been crowned. For the present, let it suffice to say that Jesus was fond of food and drink, and some early Christian authors report that he self-identified as food and wine. But back to this saying, Jesus said that nothing coming in, that it's not what goes into a person that defiles them, it's what comes out. And he follows this with his usual catchphrase, paraphrase, which is, anyone with two good ears had better listen up. But this time he sort of stuck his foot in his mouth because he soon encounters a deaf man. This man can neither hear nor speak. Words from outside can't get in. Words from inside cannot get out. Then, according to Mark's gospel, Jesus took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Now the pronouns, I'm going to read this to you again. Jesus took him aside from the multitude, put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. The pronouns make this transaction difficult to follow. But it looks like Jesus sticks his fingers into the man's ear, then spits on his own finger and touches the man's tongue. Something comes out of Jesus and goes into that man's mouth. Clearly, some bodily boundaries are being crossed here. Plus, the man in question is not kosher and may have been eating a ham and cheese sandwich on his way there. In which case, Jesus should not then put his finger into his own mouth. Then Jesus, you see, Holy Ghost again. Okay. Then Jesus declares that this deed should be kept a secret, but the more he insists on secrecy, the more people spread the news. A little later, Jesus will perform a similar healing by spitting in someone's eye. We've all heard this story, right? In Mark's gospel, we read, in the King James Version, "And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and he besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon them, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. After this, he put his hands again on his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly." When this story first popped into my head, I did a quick internet search to get the citation. So I typed in Jesus blind man spit. And I happened to glimpse a forum question: how did the blind man know what trees looked like? I am stumped. In these two miracle narratives, Jesus uses his saliva as a magical potion to cast a healing spell. The stories do not tell us whether he'd recently been drinking, or, for that matter, whether he had the power to turn his own spit into wine. This would bolster the credibility of these miracles, since alcohol has certain curative properties. But we'll get nowhere questioning the chemistry of these miracles. Christianity's general understanding of Jesus' magic was that his body was a portal through which energies from ethereal realms could enter into the tangible world. This is a bit contradictory with the Christian understanding that Jesus came to transfer people from the tangible flesh world into the intangible spirit world, in which case he could have more easily cured deafness and blindness by killing these people, liberating their souls from their bodies. Some scriptural scholars tell us that the deafness and blindness in these stories are metaphors for the failure to perceive Jesus' significance. But it's unclear how spitting in someone's eye proves any cosmic Christological claim. Plus, by modern standards, that would be very insensitive toward persons with disabilities. One can only heal or cure a person if something is wrong with them. And I am not certain now whether Jesus should have changed these persons or counseled them on how to find their own power in their bodies the way that God made them. I don't know. I can only speak for myself. If Jesus cured my mental illness, I would not be a writer anymore. I would not want Jesus to transform me into a normal person. I would much rather Jesus miraculously transform everyone else into fans of my writing. Every year at Easter, Jesus rises from the tomb, looks at the long, dark shadow of Christianity, and burrows in again. And every year, the day after Easter, is a time of bombing and shooting and cruelty and injustice all over the world, except for Buffalo, where the day after Easter is Dingus Day, when everyone is Polish, and we celebrate the spring with wet t-shirts and water guns, even if the squirts turn to icicles in midair. From Easter to Easter, every Sunday, millions of people eat and drink Jesus, and the world goes on as before. Just once, I would like to see Jesus leap up onto the Last Supper table in his gold lame jumpsuit, fire up the karaoke machine, and belt out Barry Manilow's "This One's for You." I would burst into tears, and I would feel like now nothing can be the same. But I'd like to think that someday, when people finally eat and drink enough Jesus, they may ingest some of his compassion. After all, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Thank you. That was the religious portion of our show. Please do what the leaflet says. Yes, next up is our meditation hymn, our closing hymn, "Love Will Guide Us." any announcements today?
I just have a couple before we start, Teresa. I forgot to mention, Joan did have a joy. She just said she wanted to thank the board for all the betterment they do for the congregation. And then I have an announcement of, I want to have the GED graduation here. It'll be 14th. I will send out details for people who want to help out with graduation. And then next week is Easter, and we will have our traditional adult-only Easter egg hunt. I will bring some chocolate if anybody under 21 comes. All right.
Can we get the TV going? If any of you read our announcements this week, we're starting our annual pledge drive. And since it's the 250th year of the Declaration of Independence, and since most of us really have no idea what's in the Declaration or how it came to be written, and the fact that UU churches are governed pretty much by the same ideas that were elucidated in the Declaration, we decided that was going to be our theme this year. So we're starting off today with something about Thomas Paine. And I'm going to read you a quote from American Scripture by Pauline Maier. Americans were afraid to embrace independence, Paine said, not only because they thought better of the old regime than it deserved, but also because they had no plans for a new one. So he offered some suggestions guided by a maxim that the more simple a thing is, the less likely it is to be disordered, and the easier repaired when disordered, which remains today a basic principle of engineering. Out went the complex divisions and balancing of the British Constitution. State governments, he suggested, should consist of annually elected assemblies with a president or presiding officer, not altogether unlike the extra-legal provincial congresses and conventions of the time, and be subject to the authority of a continental Congress. So we're going to see a little blurb about common sense, which George Washington himself said flipped the colonists from being loyalists to people searching for independence.
If we must erect an independent government in America, a republic will produce strength, hardiness, activity, courage, fortitude, and enterprise. But there is so much rascality, so much venality and corruption, so much avarice and ambition, such a rage for profit and commerce among all ranks and degrees of men, even in America. But I sometimes doubt whether there is public virtue enough to support a republic. John Adams.
The leaders of the American Revolution need popular support. The leaders of the American Revolution are going to have to make promises that there's going to be greater social mobility, there's going to be greater respect for common people, there is going to be broader political participation in the future than there has been in the colonial past. By loosening up structures of authority, including structures of religious authority, if you're making this revolution and you need the support of thousands of common people, men and women, what's in it for them?
Up to the 18th century, people assumed that everything will always remain the same. But the idea that you could take charge and change your culture, that's the fundamental basis of the Enlightenment, that man can be changed.
The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a country, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent. Everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. Every spot of the old world is overrun with oppression. Freedom hath been hunted round the globe. Oh, receive the fugitive, and prepare in time an asylum for mankind. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand.
On January 9th, 1776, a slender pamphlet titled Common Sense was published in Philadelphia, the most important pamphlet in American history. It was signed simply, An Englishman. Its author, a recent newcomer to America, was 38-year-old Thomas Paine. The son of a Quaker corset maker and his Anglican wife, Paine had failed at his father's profession, lost his first wife and their child in childbirth, been fired from his post as tax collector, endured the collapse of a second childless marriage, and had seen his possessions auctioned off to pay his debts. During his 8-week voyage from Britain, he'd contracted typhus, and when his ship reached Philadelphia, he had to be carried off, half dead. But Paine was a master with words, skillfully weaving the latest Enlightenment philosophy with biblical references that everyone knew. And he was a violent foe of aristocracy and monarchy.
It's a much more radical document than anything that had preceded it. Common Sense takes off like an accelerant through the colonies. Everyone reads it.
Excerpts from Common Sense appeared in newspapers throughout the colonies. The pamphlet would sell tens of thousands of copies.
It is an unprecedented bestseller. With the exception of the Bible in the colonies, no book has been read as widely as Common Sense is.
It was a wholesale attack on the entire world of Britain, political, cultural, and it's in slam-bang prose. No American pamphleteer wrote that kind of really tough, extreme language.
It just made people listen and made people think. At a time when the Congress would never have thought of attacking the king personally. King George III, the crown of England. They were always like, oh, he's not really getting it. It's Parliament that's our problem. The king needs to help us. He just called the king a beast in print. He was the working class intellectual. His politics were radically democratic in many ways, and that made him different from the other famous founders.
Hereditary succession is an insult and an imposition on posterity. For all men being originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. One of the strongest natural proofs of the folly of hereditary right in kings is that nature disapproves it. Otherwise, she would not so frequently turn it into ridicule by giving mankind an ass for a lion.
That pamphlet did stir people's minds about the possibility of a different kind of world.
Common Sense struck a string which required a touch to make it vibrate. The country was ripe for independence and only needed somebody to tell the people so. Private Ashbel Green.
Some of the founders and others thought this is the moment when we can start over again. We can actually begin the world anew. And it must have been, wildly exciting at the time. And I think it still excites us that we are the product of a revolutionary moment where the world turned upside down.
My countrymen will come reluctantly into the idea of independency. I find Common Sense is working a wonderful change in the minds of many men. George Washington.
Hi, this is David Schmidt. I hope you enjoyed that excerpt from The American Revolution, a new film I directed with Ken Burns and Sarah Botstein that explores the most consequential revolution in history. Join the conversation about what America's founding meant then and now, and please watch the entire series on the PBS app or at pbs.org.
If we must erect an independent government in America, a republic.
Do we have any other announcements today? All right. I'm excited to announce that in about a half hour, I will be giving an adult education presentation about women in early Christianity and women in the New Testament. So I think this will be really interesting. Together we have sanctified this space. If you have found strength and comfort here, share some out there. Remember that you are blessed, and you are a blessing, and you are not alone. Please join me for the words of extinguishing the chalice. Do we have any volunteers to extinguish the chalice? All right, I'm done. I'm done playing with fire for the day. It's okay. I just don't know if fire is done playing with me. But yes, please. It's okay. It likes you. You know what? If you will extinguish the chalice, I will do the postlude. I'll trade you. Because I think I'll be safer with the piano. This one's going out to Jesus, wherever he is. It's called Shine On You Crazy Diamond. All right, thank you.